Hey, what's up you guys? Thomas Love here, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing the beginning steps of learning how to throw on the pottery wheel. So in front of me I have all the tools I need. I have my bat, I have my bat grabber, chamois underneath there. We're going to make sure that stays nice and wet. Keep our bat on. I have a bucket mostly full of water. I have my sponge. I have a wooden stick tool. I have my wooden rib, my needle tool, and a wire tool. I'm also using about 2 pounds of clay here. That's an appropriate size to start learning how to throw. Anything between 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds, something that fits comfortable in both of your hands. So the first thing that we're going to do here is get our sponge a little wet, and we're going to kind of clean the center of the bat to make sure that there's no debris, and a little bit of moisture will help the clay stick, and it's also going to help kind of draw a bullseye target for when we have to take our ball of clay and slam it in the center. So at this point I'm going to start speeding the wheel up a little bit. The pedal should be on the right on the floor. I'm going to start spinning it nice and slow. I'm going to take both my hands and I'm going to start clapping the clay at the same time. Both hands at the same time. And we're trying to, this is just kind of to make sure that the clay stays really stuck to the wheel head, and also to make the centering process just a little bit easier. So at this point I'm going to start spinning my wheel a lot faster, about 50% of its power at least. I'm going to get a little bit of water on my hands and fingers, and I'm going to press on the edge right where the clay meets the bat. And we call that sealing the deal. This is going to make sure that the clay is really stuck on there. All right, so lots of water at this point on your hands, on your clay. Everything should be slippery and shiny and wet. So the first step I use for centering on the pottery wheel is I take my left hand and I want to focus on the heel of this hand, right where the palm meets the wrist. This is the most sturdy part of your hand here, and I'm going to place that point right at about 7 o'clock, if you're referencing a clock, and I'm going to be pushing it towards about 1 or 2 o'clock, or the front right leg of your pottery wheel, or right where my bucket of water is. So I'm going to use my right hand to support my left wrist as I do this. Alright, and so that's starting to cone the clay upward a little bit. So the left hand's going to stay exactly the same shape that it was, but the right hand now is going to create kind of a karate chop position downward with our fingers up, and the back side heel of our hand right here is going to, right where you'd hit it with the karate chop, that's where we want to place our right hand, and we want to keep our left hand and our right hand touching at all times, keep them together. So while the right hand is compressing and pushing the clay downward, the left hand is still acting as a profile to make sure that the clay goes to the same shape that we want it to be. So I'm going to start pressing down with my right hand now, and my left hand is just supporting the side walls of this clay. All right, so centering is you're going to have to do this at least a few times, and upwards of a dozen times. If you're a beginner, it might take that many times. So the next point where I start centering is I take both my heels of my hand on my left and my right. So the left stays at 7 o'clock, but the right is going to go at 5 o'clock. And now they're both together going to be pushing inward and upward to create a bigger, taller cone. And so this is helping the clay not only get centered, but there's kind of a blender effect going on with the wheel spinning, and the clay's getting mixed up really nice and smooth and homogeneously together. So after a while of practicing this, the motions get a little easier and a little bit more fluid, and they will kind of tend to lead into one and the next. So you'll know your clay is centered once it's no longer bouncing or tapping against your hand. It should feel smooth. If you close your eyes with both your hands holding it, it shouldn't feel like there's any shaking or vibrating at all. It should just feel smooth and perfect. All right, so I would say this is pretty centered at this point. So obviously this is now off center, and so if you get a little off center, you're really just going to have to keep your elbows in, brace yourself really strong, keep your left hand where I was saying before, your right hand up top, And we just want to lean in. It's not just your hand strength, but it's the weight and leverage of your full body mass that's going to hold this clay in place. All right, so after centering, I tend to try to clean up just a little bit, get all the slop off of my hands, and most importantly off of the wheel head. And that's also a good, the wooden rib is also a good tool for scraping off any unwanted clay from your bat. All right, so after you've conquered the centering portion, we're gonna start to open this piece of clay now. We're gonna create the inside space to it. So we wanna open it kind of in the shape of a funnel, so a really wide mouth and a really narrow base. And so to create that shape on the inside of the pot, we're gonna create a very similar shape with our fingertips. So it's both my peace fingers on both hands, and they're gonna point downward into like an arrow or a pizza slice, left overlapping on top of the right. So lead with your dominant hand, and we're always gonna be working at about 4 o'clock right here. I'm leading with my middle finger. In a second, you'll see right where the clay is gathering. And so I'm just slowly, gently leaning forward, drilling the clay. It should open up to a nice, kind of blossom up into a nice open well right there. And you can see how the clay is gathering. It's the full length of this middle finger. Get some more water. You don't need to have a puddle in there, but just a little bit. It shouldn't ever feel dry or tacky or sticky or anything. It should feel very slippery and smooth. Okay, so the most important thing about this step is to not drill all the way down to the wheel head or to the bat. Otherwise, you're not going to have a floor for your piece of pottery. So to check the thickness of the floor, we're going to use our needle tool. We're actually going to pierce through the floor all the way down to the bat, and we're going to follow through with our index finger until we reach the clay and then come out. And that's exactly what we want to see, is about 1/2 inch, about the thickness of one of your fingertips. And that's just enough clay to make sure that you have a stable, sturdy bottom, and also enough clay to be able to trim away any excess to create a foot rim, which we'll probably be reviewing in the next video. Okay, so at this point we can just kind of go back in with that drilling step again, just to kind of plug up that hole. And the next step is to expand the width for our floor. Right now, it's a very pointy, narrow floor, and that's just not gonna work for a functional object. I want you guys to kind of envision like the profile of like a soup can. It has kind of a wide inner circle on the inside and a straight wall, and then a circular opening. And so the cylinder is really what we're striving for, and we gotta work from the bottom up. So now we're going to be expanding the floor. So very similar finger positioning as to what we were doing before, only this time we're going to curl them and kind of hook. That way we're able to grab, and we're going to go at the very center, at the very bottom, and we're going to start to curl our fingers and grab and pull right towards our body, right towards 6 o'clock into our waist. And we only want to go about as wide as our sponge. For the amount of clay that we're using, the width of the sponge is about perfect. And if you don't have a nice round sponge like that, about 4 fingers wide is appropriate for this size. So the next step before we can start shaping or adding any height is we really have to make sure that the floor is level or compressed. And so if you're just if you leave a bunch of gouge marks from the fingertips in there, what you're going to really want to do is focus on the padding of your middle finger and place it really flat at the center of the clay, and just slowly swipe towards 3 o'clock. We're not trying to make it thinner, we're just trying to compress the clay particles more compact, more dense. It'll make it a stronger object in the end, and less likely to break or crack during the firing process. So compression is very important. The next step before we really start doing the height is I kind of want to just narrow this a little bit. It got a little wide with all of the compression, with expanding the floor. It's kind of a little wide, and if I want to keep a straight, narrow vessel, it's a good thing to collar it inward and kind of squeeze it in. So just like when we were centering and coning up, we're pretty much going to do just another cone upward. So the base of our hands are right at about 7 and 5 o'clock, and they're just going to kind of push and squeeze inward, and that's just going to set this cylinder to be a little taller and a little narrower, and that's going to make your job a little easier with this next step, which we call pulling, and that's what I'm going to start doing right now. Pulling is a very difficult step, much like centering is a very difficult step, but it will be much easier if you follow these little tips that I'm going to give you. The first one, make sure that you're working on the right side of your pottery wheel, especially if your wheel is turning counterclockwise, which most of our wheels are. We're going to want to work on the right side of our body. And so the left hand goes on the inside of the pot, and the right hand stays on the outside. And they're both right at about between 5 and 4 o'clock. Anywhere between 3 and 6 is good, but I like to work closer to my body. So right here at about 5 o'clock is where I'm going to place my hands. Your inner left hand is just kind of a backer board for the right hand to press into. The right hand is really what's doing all of the work in this step. The right hand is what's pinching into the left hand, and it's what's going to kind of create this groove that you should be able to see at the bottom of my piece of pottery down here. So once you see that groove, that's evidence that you're pinching the cylinder thinner. And once you see that, you're going to begin lifting upward, and you're going to kind of draw the clay upward vertically. All right, so let's kind of see what that looks like. General rule of thumb is that you can pinch in for about 3 seconds, and you're going to lift up for 10 seconds, sometimes more. Again, I'm always going to try to keep my hands touching in one way, even though one hand's inside and one hand's outside. I'm still going to either meet my thumbs or my wrists together in some manner for extra stability. So the right hand is pushing under the pot. It's kind of undercutting it to pinch it thinner. And then again, the right hand is following the left hand upward, and we're lifting, and we're really just wipe that away. We're really just displacing the clay upward vertically. All the clay is really thick and down low at the bottom. We really just want to pinch it thinner at the bottom and then draw the clay upward so that the full cylinder is the same thickness from top to bottom. Many beginners find that holding the sponge in their right hand makes this process easier. It might be having the extra moisture from the water, or it might be the cushion from the sponge, but a lot of people who are first learning to throw like to hold the sponge in their right hand during this process, but it's still the pressure from my middle finger that's going to create this groove at the bottom, right where it meets the bat. And we're just going to do another pull now. All right, so pinch in for about 1, 2, 3, and now I'm going to begin lifting upward for closer to 10 seconds. And as you see, I'm constantly, whenever I feel like the pot's getting a little dry, I just kind of add a little bit of water with the sponge or my hand. So pinch in 1, 2, 3, and now we're going to start lifting upward for closer to 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when you're finishing a pull, it's very important to not let go of the pot too quickly. You might just want to hang out at the lip for just a moment, and I'd even smooth over the lip with your sponge or with your fingers just to make sure that everything's nice and smooth. We don't want any sharp edges on these objects, especially if you're trying to make a cup or a bowl or something functional. I'd really encourage you guys to smooth off any edges. Okay, so usually we do 3 pulls for a cylinder, depending on what type of shaping you're planning on doing. But for now, especially if this is your first time using the pottery wheel, if you have any object, I would consider this a successful attempt at throwing on the pottery wheel. So I'm going to finish with 1 more pull. Just kind of straighten her out a little bit. Just get the last bit of that excess thickness from the bottom. Pull that upward. All right. And it's okay to leave a little bit of clay at the bottom. You can trim that off later once the pot's a little more dry, and that'll make it a lot easier. But it's really important that before you get too tall, or at least before you're finished, you gotta take your sponge, wring it out of any water, and you're gonna need to go onto the inside of your piece and make sure that you mop up any excess water. If you leave water on the inside of your pot, it's gonna dry unevenly and it'll probably lead to a crack. Okay, so we're gonna call this a finished cylinder at this point. No need to shape it too much. We don't want to lose it, especially if this is one of the first pieces you've made. Okay, so I'm going to take my wooden stick tool now, and I'm going to use it to kind of trim off some of this excess clay at the bottom, and it's also going to kind of draw a little bit of an undercut underneath the pot, and that'll make wiring it much easier. So I'm going to get my wire tool now. I'm going to wrap it around my fingers a couple of times. I'm going to place it at about 12 o'clock, nice and firm, flat thumbs, flat across the board, and just swipe towards yourself nice and quickly. If you're working in a studio with other members or classes, you might need to make a cookie. And so a cookie is just like a little name tag for your pot. And so if you're using shared space, you're gonna need to make sure that you write your name and maybe your shelf number or your class code. All right, so I got a little cookie of clay. I'm gonna get my wooden knife and I'm going to write my initials on there. We wanna keep this nice and legible for whoever has to route your pottery later. So I'm gonna go T, L, and let's just say that my class code is M10, which would stand for Monday morning at 10 a.m. All right, so M10. Okay, and we're just gonna leave that on the bat for whoever is going to route the pottery to its designated location later. At this point, you can take your bat off and you may take it to your drying rack or your shelf, wherever your studio stores its pottery. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for watching.